ahead and get us started. So thanks everybody for being here. We have a great program tonight. I'm very curious. I wish I could ask you all, if we were in a room, I could ask for a show of hands. I'm wondering how many of you have already seen or either the videos or have shown up for some of these programs where we talked about this topic, which is cannabis, marijuana, weed. We got lots of other names on the screen that you can see that reference this substance. But in particular, I'm wondering if you've seen our recent programs with Ben Court. I feel like this is a perfect follow-up to some of the things he's been presenting. Ben is a policy expert, a marijuana policy expert from Colorado. His most recent program was just a couple of weeks ago called Lessons Learned from Colorado. And I feel like he gave us all a lot of information about how this is not, as we all like to say these days, not only not your father's weed, but not your older sibling's weed. It's a very different substance, but I feel like what we were hearing so much from folks is, how do I have these conversations with my kids? How do I talk about this? Because they think it's, you know, really, really helpful or really harmless or whatever their thoughts might be. And the family members, the loved ones, even medical professionals, many people are feeling a little frustrated with not having the language, you know, to talk with kids about these things. So we're really lucky to have Patrick Dowling with us tonight to help us with some of that. And I'm going to be getting us started with some background information. But first, I want to tell you that we are recording this program. We're going to be posting it on our YouTube page in the morning, as well as our follow-up page. Any questions that you submit throughout the program, whether you use the chat box or the Q&A box, any of those are fine with us. But any of those questions you submit will not be visible on the recording. And I'm going to ask our presenters also, if you see a question come up and if somebody's name is on there, please don't say, Kim has a question. You know, let's not use names, because we just want people to feel very comfortable asking any questions that they might have. So I want to introduce you to Judy Hirsch. Hi, Judy.
Hello. Oh, no, I'm good. Yep. Hello.
Hi, Judy. Judy's our program director. And we have a brand new member of our team on tonight, Kara Schwartz. Hi, Kara.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. This is our new communications manager who just started yesterday. So really brand new. Yay. We're so glad she's with us. And a big thank you to the Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol. This is part of a grant that is called the Youth Marijuana Prevention Project. And they have funded a number of our programs. This is our second in 5 years of this grant. So we're going to be talking a lot about the subject of marijuana as it impacts young people and their developing brains. I always like to encourage our folks, especially if you're a parent, to please check out the many, many support groups that are taking place throughout the region. You're looking at a Zoom meeting, looking at a Zoom meeting right now. That is our world. So many of the parent groups are meeting online. There are a couple that are starting to meet in person. Some are doing a hybrid, some are doing a phone. But if you go to that website, conversation.zone/parents, you'll find a lot of information. There are these blue buttons, and they list programs or meetings that are taking place throughout the week. This is our follow-up page for this program. So conversation.zone/Montco, and actually you could also go to conversation.zone/cannabis, because we have a lot of really helpful information there as well. So again, cannabis, it is complicated, especially when we're talking about kids. So just a little bit of why we're all here tonight. If you are a parent, it is so great that you're here, because we know that kids who learn about the risks of substance use from their parents are up to 50% less likely to misuse substances. So moms, dads, grandparents, foster parents, adoptive parents, anyone who is looking after young people, you are the most important messenger in your young person's life. You are 1,000 school teachers, and we really hope that you will take something away tonight that will help you to feel more empowered just to even have these kinds of conversations. Sorry about that. Okay, so these slides, I showed these about 1 million times already, and poor Patrick and Judy are so tired of seeing them, I'm sure, but it's really important that we understand this. We are certainly not saying that everyone who uses marijuana is going to become addicted, but if you look at any substance use under the age of 18, about 1 in 4 of us have the potential to become addicted to a substance. If we wait until we're over the age of 21, that ratio drops to 1 in 25. So we have a much better chance if we just hold off until we're a little further along in our development. And to help understand that, we just really need to look at the developing brain. And basically all of our brains develop in the same way. The very last part of the brain to become fully developed is the prefrontal cortex. So all of these other very important things that happen in our childhood and our early development are happening, but so that's all the accelerator, all the parts of the brain that are learning, trying to gather information and learn languages more efficiently, and sports and musical instruments and all of that. The part of the brain that is the very last to develop, which is not until we're about the age of 25, is the prefrontal cortex. That's where we have executive function. Those are the brakes. So while the accelerators working just fine, the brakes aren't fully operational until we're about 25. Certainly young people can have excellent judgment and make good decisions, but quite often this can be a problem, especially when you introduce substances at that young age, which is why that delaying the onset of use is so very important. And again, just looking at why it is that some people become addicted to any substance or behavior, while others do not. There are basically 3 very general factors that contribute to this. A really important one is genetics. It's estimated that about 50 to 60% of our likelihood to develop a substance use disorder relates to genetics. Also psychosocial emotional. So this might be a mental health diagnosis, trauma, some other things that interfere with our emotional development, and then environment. So looking at the access to substances, is there use in the home, in the neighborhood, with the peer group, and all of these things are exacerbated by the age of the onset of use. So again, the earlier we get started, the more likely we have of developing a problem. So since we're talking about a Montgomery County landscape here, I wanted to take a look at a couple of things. This is the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, just looking at Montgomery County, and this is past 30-day marijuana use, and looking at, oh, I'm so sorry, this is not Montgomery County, this is Pennsylvania. This is looking at the state of Pennsylvania. So 6th graders, 8th graders, 10th and 12th graders were surveyed in 2015, 2017, and 2019. And just to give you kind of a glimpse of where we are with substance use, it's been relatively steady throughout the state. I know that in Montgomery County, it has dropped a bit, this in the 2019 survey results. This is looking at past 30-day vaping. So just vaping, we don't know. There's a whole nother set of graphs that show vaping what? Vaping nicotine, vaping THC, vaping other things. We'll take a look at the THC in a moment, but this is just overall vaping in the state of Pennsylvania that has increased. And then if you look at the young people who said that they were vaping, of those students, these numbers of students were vaping THC products. So marijuana, hash oil, and so on. Okay, and here's just a national study called Monitoring the Future. That's a really great resource for tracking trends. And they survey 8th, 10th, and 12th graders every year. So they're constantly looking at these trends. And they really notice some significant changes in vaping. And as you can see, that includes marijuana use in past year and past month use. And you can see the daily numbers have really kind of spiked a bit as well. In fact, if you look at vaping, again, when we see young people vaping THC, again, this is Monitoring the Future, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. This is the second highest spike that they've seen in their history of surveying. The largest spike was in 2017, 2018, when they saw nicotine vaping really spike up. But this was their second highest increase in any kind of tracking that they've done, and that was vaping of THC. And again, here's looking at daily marijuana use versus past year marijuana use. These are relatively stable. The past year is relatively stable, but you can see that the 10th graders are really kind of catching up with the 12th graders a bit, which is of course disconcerting. And this is looking at the different kinds of substances, if it's any vaping, just flavoring. When we say just flavoring, the reason they use quotes around that is it's not an innocuous thing. You know, there are other substances, other chemicals in there that really, I think we all know by now, that should not be ingested into the lungs. And if you don't know, I'm sure you all do by this time, but vaping is basically, we're talking about e-cigarettes, which, you know, ends units and electronic nicotine delivery systems. It's you know, just been a problem for a number of years, and hopefully because of all the concern about COVID and lung health, that this might be dissipating. We're hoping to see some changes in upcoming research. Just a quick look at some of the devices. These could be filled with just about anything. We just like to show these to you so that parents and family members and so forth have an idea of what they might, if you come across some of these devices, that this is a watch that you can vape. I mean, there's some very creative ways to get certain substances into our kids' bodies. And of course they want to try to hide it. So they love this kind of creative stuff, I think, in many ways. What can be inside? Nicotine, THC, or CBD. So any combination of these. There could be trace amounts of THC, even if someone has put you know, just flavoring or something like that in the pen. But it's very hard to tell unless you have a really solid study for what the substances are to know what's actually in the vape pen. And this is just looking at adolescent use of marijuana. Does impact memory and learning, distorted perception, apathy, so amotivational syndrome, things like that. Just basic, you know, motivation, function, and sharpness. Our kids really need to be sharp and alert, and this is frankly not helping, especially with the young person in particular. And cannabis can have a lot of different effects. It can actually be a stimulant, in some cases a depressant, a hallucinogen. You can look at the different strains of flowers, whether it's sativa or indica and different things like that. But, you know, it depends on the person who's using it and how they respond to it. So these basically can all impact people in different ways and have these kinds of effects that you see here on the screen. Just to distinguish the two most interesting ingredients in a cannabis plant are CBD and THC. There are actually hundreds of chemicals in the cannabis plant, especially once it's dried, and even more when it's lit and heated. So CBD does not have any psychoactive ingredient. It is not a psychoactive ingredient. It is most likely where the medicine is. So we know that there are definitely great products out there for people who have seizure disorder. There is an FDA approved medication called Epidiolex, which is for an early childhood seizure disorder called Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut. And so those are not substances that you would be acquiring in a medical marijuana store or dispensary. You would be getting these prescribed from a physician, and they would be through a pharmacy and so forth, because they are FDA approved medicines. And then also, you know, just taking a look at THC, this is the psychoactive ingredient, right? This is what gets us high, and it is what you find in a lot of high potency products like wax, dabs, oils, tinctures, other things. So we're seeing a lot of use of these concentrates in young people. And I won't spend too much time talking about this because we have loads of other resources to help you understand some of these things. And I know that Patrick has a story that I've heard him share in the past about this cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome that's happened with a client of his. And it's something that we also hear from inpatient treatment professionals who talk about this, where, you know, excessive use will actually cause nausea, whereas in many people, the marijuana products such as Marinol, you know, will help with nausea and will increase appetite. But this can happen with someone who's, you know, just has a certain reaction to it, where they're vomiting pretty uncontrollably. And it seems that the only thing that really helps those symptoms to subside are a hot shower or bath. That seems to be pretty universal. So just want to make you aware of that. And this is very, very important to understand. When we're talking, as I said earlier, we're not talking about yesterday's marijuana. I should mention, as I often do, that I have a son in recovery. Today, by the way, is his birthday. He's 32 today. He got sober when he was 21. He was not using the products down in the lower half of the screen. They weren't even around 10, 12 years ago. So he was smoking the plant. That's what was around when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, it was like in the 3 percentile range of THC. That means 3% THC means that's how much of that psychoactive ingredient was in what we were smoking back then. And today, what we see in the plant material is up to 30%. The average THC level in the plant, the dried smokable plant, is 13%. When you look at concentrates, it has been touted in states where recreational and where medicinal is legalized. In fact, here in Pennsylvania, we have many dispensaries who will list many of these products that are actually even close to 90% THC. So edibles, other things like that can have much higher concentrates. This is what some of these products look like. You see up in the top right, this THCA crystal, that is the kind of latest and greatest. So there's a lot of science going on trying to get this as concentrated as possible. And I think that the idea is that you'll use less, but unfortunately, a lot of our young folks, I mean, you can just Google it on YouTube and you can find video after video of challenges and things like that. So certainly not all of our kids, but we just want to be aware that this can be enticing and it's out there. So that is all I have. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our first guest. We have Patrick first, and then after that, you're going to hear from Andrew. Andrew and Patrick have a little history that perhaps they'll share with you. But Patrick is a licensed professional counselor with a master's degree in clinical counseling and marriage and family therapy. Patrick has trained and worked in as advanced addictions counselor for over 20 years as a clinical supervisor, clinical director, administrator, and as a human being, which we just love about him. He utilizes various models of therapy, including family systems, motivational interviewing, dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction, trauma treatment, and relapse prevention. Patrick has been especially known for his successful assistance with families in complex interventions. I will stop sharing my screen and we can say hello to Patrick.
Thank you, Kim. It's I'm going to put my timer on to keep myself honest here with scheduling. So it's always a pleasure to be a part of the conversations, talks. You guys do a fabulous job, as you know. So I'm here just to talk about my experience as a family therapist, as an addiction therapist, and to be transparent, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've been sober for 24 years. So I think, one of the things that Kim mentioned at the beginning of this conversation is the influence of parents, that parents have a tremendous amount of influence on children's behavior. And, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the parents for coming to this talk. I think that we should be filling football stadiums and we should have, attendance in the thousands, but you guys are here and we ask hopefully that you would be ambassadors of this information to other parents, to your children. My mission here is to purvey truth and not be alarmist, but tell the truth. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think that that's how we gain credibility with our clients, with our children, is we tell the unvarnished truth. And that's what, I'm going to share with you my experience and my professional experience tonight around marijuana in particular. So thank you for being here. I want to start off by talking about trust. And I think, one of the things that I see with families that I work with, the most damaging aspect of undertreated or untreated mental health and or substance abuse issues is that trust gets damaged. And what do I mean by that? I mean the ability for that family system to create safety for itself, to create safety for the parents to create safety for their children, for the parents to also, for the children to also be respectful and create safety for their family system as well. When that trust gets damaged, everybody gets hurt in one way or another. And, sometimes it's the identified client, obviously. Sometimes it's the parents. It's often siblings are also in the wake of this too. And I've done a lot of work with siblings of or family members of who kind of held it all together until somebody got sober, and then all of a sudden they kind of fall apart. And that's pretty common because it's not safe in the moment to acknowledge your needs or get your needs met. So I think our job, I'm a parent of 3 children. Our job as parents, number one, is to create safety. So you're here, which means you're becoming a more informed consumer of what's going on in the world, right? To stand in your values, knowing that the world's going to push back on that. Our kids, any self-respecting teenager is going to push back on values, right? They're going to want what they want. That's understandable. So part of what we're asking our kids is to trust us to be the parent, to create safety, to say no when it's no, to say yes when it's yes, but to be really clear about our value system and stand firm in that. And that also means trusting our kid to be a kid. They're going to want what they want. They're going to want what's convenient at times, what's socially acceptable, not necessarily what's in their best interest at times, but just what feels good. There's, as we say in recovery, just because it feels good doesn't mean it is good, right? And that's the difference between character building over comfort. So what does that have to do with marijuana use? So, when our kids, and it's interesting, we look at these slides, right? So 12th graders, we're talking about 20% or less. And I can't tell you how many folks I see that will say, everybody's getting high. And I say, no, they're not, right? And that's where I think we need this right sizing of how prevalent is this really? Because I think when we get in these little peer groups, we perceive that that's what is happening, right? Football players know football players. People in the band know people in the band. People who use drugs or alcohol know people who use drugs or alcohol. That does not mean that that is what's happening as a norm. That means that's the norm group that you're in. So that might be an opportunity to take a look at what norm group am I opting into, and is that a good idea? Is that the kind of folks I need to be hanging with? So again, trust myself to be the parent, trust my kid to be a kid, and trust industry to act in the best interest of industry. So what does that mean? I should have brought up, I have advertisements of nicotine ads, right? Ronald Reagan in nicotine ads, right? Back when they didn't know that smoking was that bad for you. I have ads for sugar. Sugar's a great snack in between meals to keep you from It's a great thing to keep you from snacking in between meals, right? This is back in the 50s and 60s when, advertisers could say things that, were blatantly lies, but sounded like a good idea, right? Most of the THC industry is now owned by the tobacco industry. So I think we can all arguably agree that the tobacco industry is not really interested in your health or the healthier children. They could care less. What they're in the business of is having consumers, right? They're in the business of selling their product, period. That's why the tobacco industry got into the vaping industry, because that was the next segue, which was initially marketed as a harm reduction tool, which ended up doing some recruiting to get more people to use nicotine products. Again, not interested in actual healthcare, interested in sales. So I think we have to understand that we're dealing with an industry that wants to self-perpetuate, does not really care about the well-being of the consumer, right? So our job, I think, is to be a very informed consumer. We can also argue that with, some of the drug companies. We've seen the opiate epidemic and some of what's been happening there, acting in their own best interest. There are good actors, there are bad actors, and our job is to be really informed consumers, right? So let's fast forward that to marijuana use. So I want to be clear from my perspective. I suffer no illusion that everybody who smokes weed is going to become addicted or not thrive, right? I don't believe that is true. What I do believe is true, in my experience, is that for about 3 years, I ran Mainline Health's outpatient program, and we had 2 locations, and we had 4 partial hospitalization programs going, an adult and an adolescent and an adult adolescent in the other. And here's what we found in those partial hospitalization programs. So if you're not familiar, a partial hospitalization program is the level right below an inpatient psychiatric program and right above an IOP program. So the goal of a partial program is you come 5 days a week for about 5 hours, you get psychiatry included. The goal of that program is to keep people from going into inpatient, right? It's to try to keep, just like our primary care physicians, is to keep you from out of the hospital, right? Keep you from needing a higher level of care. If you need it, we'll help you get it. But our job is to help stabilize and help you not have to go to that higher level of care, right? So I was running these programs, and what we saw was 70%, roughly 70% of clients, adolescents and adults, presenting for acute psychiatric issues, mental health diagnoses, 70% of those were self-medicating significantly in some way. So that's a big number, right? So that means 70% of the clients who were presenting for acute depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, some kind of significant mental health diagnosis where they weren't in school, they weren't in work, they weren't able to go do their normal activities. They were engaged with us full time for multiple weeks to get stabilized, to hopefully return to those levels of functioning. 70% of those were significantly self-medicating in some way. What does that mean? That means, to me, substance use is an attempt to cope with or mask whatever really is going on. The criteria for a substance use disorder is not about how much or how often someone's using. That's only 2 of the criteria. There's 11 criteria, if you want to look this up. What's really interesting to me is most of those criteria are about the substance use interfering with that person's ability to respond to their world. They don't listen to their own physical health. They don't listen to their family environment. They don't listen to their employer or their school environment. They're running into legal issues, meaning there are feedback loops that are occurring that because that person has become so attached to substance use as a solution for how they feel, that they're bypassing all these road signs. And what I say is, if the flag man is hanging off your bumper, you missed a couple things, right? So 70% of those folks in the partial program who were there really for a mental health diagnosis were significantly self-medicating. Here's what that tells me. They were using an ineffective tool to try to scratch a legitimate itch. A need for connection, a need for mental health stability, a need for sleep, a need for activation to feel like they can engage in their life and resume normal activities. It was an attempt to meet, a maladaptive attempt to meet that need. Our job is to help them, in a healthy way, meet that need so that they don't have to use a maladaptive tool to do that job, right? So if I had somebody in my family who was using substances, using marijuana, my real question is, what's the itch you're trying to scratch? I used to run also intensive outpatient programming for adolescents. And one of my favorite groups was, they knew, I'm the grown up in the room, but one of my favorite groups would be go in there and say, hey, let's talk about why drug use is awesome. Let's talk about why getting high is awesome, right? And the kids were like, this is great. This is the best group ever. And we would spend half an hour talking about all the positive things about getting loaded, right? And we would just fill the board up. And then about after half an hour, I just flip the script and say, hey, let's talk about the reasons why you need to get high in order to talk to a girl, or to feel confident in class, or to, feel like you can try out for the basketball team, or, whatever it is, right? Or feel comfortable at home. What's going on that you feel like you need to self-medicate in order to do these normal activities like watch a movie or go hang out on a Friday night? What's going on? Let's find out what that itch is, that need, so that we can help you get that need met in a way that's empowering, supportive, and gives that person the experience of being able to be effective in their life. My concern for marijuana use in particular is it's a very externalized solution, meaning the more dependent people become on their substance of choice, if it becomes an addiction, they don't internalize that locus. They don't feel like they are confident and capable. They feel like, oh, weed helps me do X, right? As opposed to I can do X. And the more that the person uses substances, one, they're not really building significant skill sets, because getting high is a very low bar in terms of how do I cultivate friendships, right? So in significant substance use, in that culture, it's a very low bar. You get high, I get high, we're going to hang out. right? Now, all of a sudden we have something that we can bond over. We may or may not have anything really in common, except for the fact that we like to use to address whatever issues are not really getting addressed, right? So it's already a level of brokenness in terms of this kind of trauma bond or brokenness bond. That's what also concerns me, is now there's a peer group that has a level of unmanaged mental health issues, and there's a bond happening there that's unhealthy. So let's talk about just mental health issues from a medical perspective for a second. There are medications, there are interventions that are way more effective at some of the conditions that people are trying to use marijuana to manage. There are strategies, there are appropriate medications, there are professionals who went to school for a long time to help people manage that, right? Nobody's helping anybody manage their marijuana dosage. That's not happening, right? People are self-administering at whatever levels they want to. Often people are not very informed consumers. They're my wizards, I call them, the guys who are like super educated and making really bad decisions. They could tell you all the strains and the percentages and, till the cows come home. And are very involved in this as their sole social justice issue, right? So when I have clients who are all about legalizing marijuana, I say, tell me about the other social justice issues that you're involved in, like water for poor countries, or advocacy for education. Tell me about the other social justice issues that you're involved in. It's like, you get that blank stare, like not really involved in those, just the legalization, because I really just like to get high, right? So what that tells me is there's a marriage now of I need marijuana as a coping skill for that itch that I don't know how to scratch more appropriately or healthfully, right? So I'm going to talk about psychosis for a second. So there is a correlation between thought disorders and hallucinogen use. For whatever reason, people tend to use medications that accentuate whatever their issue is. So our type A personalities tend to use uppers or meth or cocaine. People who tend to have a more depressive bent tend to use alcohol. People who have some kind of trauma or thought disorder tend to bend towards hallucinogen use. That does not necessarily mean that just because your loved one uses marijuana that they have a thought disorder or trauma, but there is a correlation between thought disorders and marijuana use. We don't know really if it's a chicken or the egg, because you can't do a blind study on this ethically. So what we do see though is some people experiencing substance-induced psychosis and or the onset of a thought disorder that can correlate with marijuana use. Again, we don't know if it's a chicken or the egg. My suggestion is stay out of the hen house because it doesn't go well. Another thing I'll talk about is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, so CHS. So what that really is cannabis poisoning. So what happens is the lining of the esophagus and the upper part of the digestive system gets irritated via chronic and sustained marijuana use. So what happens is the client will experience uncontrolled vomiting, nausea, may have some shaking resulting from that. And I'm talking about vomiting for a long time, like a day and a half, sometimes 2 days of uncontrolled vomiting. I had a client I worked with about 4 years ago. We did his intervention at the jail. He had just gotten arrested and for a drunken disorderly, and we were taking him to treatment, and he threw up in the back of my car in a garbage bag 30 times, over 30 times in the back of the car, from cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And this is about the 4th or 5th time this gentleman had experienced this. He was like 19, 20 at the time. So this is about the 4th or 5th time he'd experienced cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And what normally he would do is get in a hot shower, and or Ambien tends to be helpful with it, but something that is, for whatever reason, the hot shower tends to re-regulate the system. So 30 times this dude throws up on my car on the way to treatment. We ended up having to take him to the hospital, get him stable before we can take him to treatment. And I look at this guy and I said, dude, it doesn't have to be this way. Like, this is pretty bad. Like, you just got out of jail, you got legal charges, you just threw up my car 30 times. And he says, I'm pretty happy. And I just looked at him, I was like, dude, I've seen happy and this is not what it looks like. That's how delusional this person had become via their daily chronic marijuana usage. Is all bets were failing, right? School was failing, family had precluded him from being in home, just gotten arrested, and he's telling me, man, I'm on a winning streak. Like, we're doing pretty good here. That's delusional thinking. That's the power of the THC concentrates, the potential power, right? That doesn't mean it has it for everybody. And I listen, some people use marijuana and go on to have a very productive life and they self-correct out of it and they're not a daily user. That's absolutely true. The challenge is we don't know who that's going to be. So my thought, my position for parents is, a friend of mine says, how big of a monster do you want to let in your house? And I'd invite you to think about that. How big a monster do you want to let in your house? We do all these things as parents. We consciously choose where we live. We consciously choose where we send our kids to school, who our friends are, maybe where we spend our free time in terms of spiritual or religious pursuits, right? We consciously choose these things, and then we let something like this sneak in the back door and think, maybe this is innocuous. Maybe this is not a bad deal, right? Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. It's a really interesting choice from my perspective when we've spent so much time and effort trying to control these variables to let this potential monster in the back door. Maybe it's innocuous, maybe not. But my experience, and I do have a non-representative sampling, right? The people who end up in my office are there because this experiment is not going well at all. From a mental health perspective, from a substance use perspective, from a family perspective, school, all of it. At least 4 or 5 of those factors are not going well, right? And the perceived solution boomerangs and becomes a problem. So the marijuana use becomes, their favorite coping skill, but part of the problem, which precludes all the other solutions from working. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is this social and developmental issue around marijuana use. Is, again, my large concern with marijuana use is, especially in adolescence, kids are asking and answering a lot of questions. One of those questions is, from an attachment perspective, am I effective at getting my needs met? From my family system, from my school, from my friends, am I effective at getting my needs met in a sustainable, effective way? One of the things I say is that real fun leaves no remorse when it's over. I'll say that again. Real fun leaves no remorse when it's over. It's good, clean fun. If you and I are hanging out and we're joking and laughing and nobody's offended by anything that we said and we walk away, we both had a good time. If we're joking and laughing and I said things that were offensive to you or hurtful to you, and I think, boy, that was a really nice time, and you think, boy, what a jerk. That's not clean fun. Somebody lost on that one, right? So my concern around substance use, marijuana use in particular, is it's seemingly innocuous, right? However, how is it affecting that person's ability to function in all those areas that we just talked about? That, for me, is the real litmus test. Is it negatively impacting their desire to connect socially, to lean into the family system, to be a part of, to differentiate, to figure out who they are, to be active in, actively participate in whatever extracurriculars they want to do, figure out who they are. Can I get my needs met in an adaptive, healthy way? If now a substance of choice becomes an easy answer to that, I call it the relief valve, the easy relief valve, that person is now precluded from having to answer those appropriate developmental questions. Who am I? What do I like? What do I not like? What kind of people do I like to date? What people do I not like to date? What am I okay with? What am I not okay with? It just becomes an easy relief valve that everything's cool, right? As long as I have X, everything else seems to just work out. If I don't have X, if I don't have my substance of choice, now the other things become hugely problematic. Part of mental health is flexibility of thinking, and there's more than one way to get anywhere. So when I see people who become married to a particular solution, be it alcohol, drugs, whatever, that's not a mentally healthy solution. Is if they need to smoke weed, to go hang out with friends, to go on family vacation, to go to school, to do whatever, that concerns me. I don't know that anybody's actually suffering from a THC deficiency. There are more effective, healthy strategies to get that need met. So let's go back to where we started from, trust. I think our job as parents is to create an environment of trust. Can our kids trust us to parent effectively, even when it's unpopular? So I will often have parents who come to me who have mortgaged their integrity in some way. They know how they want to parent, but they've mortgaged that because their kids are challenging or difficult or have mental health issues or are using substances. So that trust has gotten lost. And what I honestly say to them is, should your kids trust you? Are you holding your lines? And that's a real interesting thing to answer. Should my kids trust me based on how I'm setting standards in my family system? And if the answer is no, that trust can be recovered, but we have to hit the reset button on what's okay with us and what's not. And what we will then find out is how married to the substance use is that person. For example, with the intervention work, I sometimes have people call me and say we need an intervention. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just need to have a leveling conversation and say, hey, this behavior, this substance use is interfering with our ability to have the kind of relationship we want with you. So the substance use has to go. If the person of concern stays married to the substance use, what we now know is at that moment that that person and their substance use is a package deal. So then we have to answer, am I okay with my kid doing something that violates my value system and I think is potentially harmful to them? Now what do I do about it? Right? So what we do is try to get that uncoupled, is that you're welcome, love to have a relationship with you, not having a relationship with your substance use. If that's a package deal, we got to get that uncoupled. The back end of that is healing the family system around the damage that mental health and substance use has caused. Is putting back the family system, being mutually respectful, communication, all that stuff. Those needs were happening when substance use came on board. And if those needs weren't getting met, that's a deficit that it negatively impacts the whole family system. So part of the recovery is making sure that that family heals and comes back together so that everybody can get their needs met within that family system in a safe, healthy way. So back to, you're welcome here, your active addiction is not. And a lot of people are very reticent to set that line. My contention is if you don't, your kids won't trust you because you don't stand in your values and your integrity. If you do, ultimately they will trust you because you're creating safety for yourself and the people in your family system. So I know we're gonna have Q&A at the end, and for the first time ever, I'm coming in under my allotted time. So I'm gonna kick it back to Kim, and thank you all for being here. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was fabulous. Thank you, as always. Patrick's a definite frequent flyer with us here at Be a Part of the Conversation. We're very grateful for all your wisdom. And Andrew, you're up next, and I'm not going to read your bio because I know you're going to tell us your history and a lot about what you're doing today in life. So I'm just going to turn it over to you. And I also just want to say, you are the most important person, with all due respect to Patrick, Kara, and Judy. You are absolutely precious to us because hearing personal stories is so meaningful and helps so many of us really understand this without the emotional entanglements of our own loved ones who we might be concerned about. So thank you very, very much for being with us this evening.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for hosting this. My name's Andrew. Welcome. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for asking me to speak, Patrick. You've been a huge blessing in my life. And when you asked me to do this, it's not something I necessarily wanted to do, but I more had to do. But now that I'm here and kind of just hearing what this program's all about, I'm excited for the opportunity, because the reality of the situation is this resource, when I'm kind of 2 to 3 years removed from the end of my, cannabis and drug use. Looking back on it now, this resource could have helped me, my family, just the whole system tremendously. I can't stress that enough. A lot of my life today is, and in the last couple of years, has been rebuilding the relationships that I completely destroyed as a result of my cannabis use and other drugs that I eventually got into. And I feel like if my parents, other parents out there had known this information, they just sort of felt maybe more comfortable kind of talking to me And it's hard to explain exactly the view that I had on my parents. And it's kind of summed up in your whole kind of quote, you know, this isn't the weed that you were smoking back in the day. I just feel like when I was growing up, you know, I was very close with my parents, especially my dad. I felt like I could tell him everything. But when it came to when I first started smoking weed as a freshman in high school, it came down as sort of an idea that I had that you don't really understand, you know, what this has turned into. It's a lot different than what you kind of experienced in your day. So yeah, I want to keep my story brief. I'll kind of talk about what I've learned, I guess, for the last couple minutes, and then I'm really excited for this Q&A portion of this program. I think that's where I know there's already a lot of questions that have been asked, and I think that's where a lot of kind of the progress and me as whatever resource I guess I am can be utilized. Yeah, so I you know, had a beautiful upbringing, nothing to really, you know, pick apart or you know, dive into. You know, I definitely was a kid that kind of seeked chaos naturally, just excitement, just kind of wanted to be part of whatever was going on in a type of way. Very competitive baseball player for a large portion of my life. So, you know, Patrick, I loved how you talked about different kind of groups that you kind of associate yourself with. And that's the overall numbers of the statistics sense of you kind of your idea. And so that was like my baseball crew. When I started smoking weed, I was, you know, playing up with the older kids, and there's a lot more kids that were doing it than, you know, kids in my grade or kids on the baseball team my age. Yeah, I remember the first time I smoked it, I just didn't really feel anything, was just so nervous, just wanted to fit in really. You know, I'll dive into the end, kind of my take and my experience, what I've learned on, you know, why I used and how I allowed it to evolve into such a thing where you know, you're left just looking at your life like, how did this happen? But in the beginning, I really just remember it as something to fit in, you know? I think that kind of urge that once again, Patrick brought up, to kind of have your needs taken care of. Your peer friend group is like, at that age, kind of priority number one, ahead of almost your you know, your relationship with your parents and school and that kind of things. It's just like who you're hanging out with. And at that time, I spent a lot of time with kids that were older than me and were smoking weed, and I just wanted to be part of the crew, and that's how it started. So yeah, I remember the first time I didn't really, you know, notice, I wasn't even really paying attention to the getting high part of it. I just wanted to fit in, you know, used it a few more times, started to get high, and I loved it. I mean, there's no way to kind of describe it other than I just loved getting high. In the beginning, and I'll kind of talk about this a little bit later too, you know, I was very conscious of consequences. I still kind of held on to, grasped onto this kind of idea that I was a normal kid and that I was going to be successful in life. I wasn't going to be, you know, a mess up or anything like that. And, you know, down the line, you know, going from freshman year to senior year, you add drinking alcohol into the mix, and just copious amounts of weed just because I loved it so much. Those lines kind of began to blur. I really stopped caring as much as what I wanted to be, and caring more selfishly in terms of like how I need to feel. So along with Patrick, I will say I'm in recovery. Drugs are a huge part of my story. I identify as an alcoholic out of respect to Alcoholics Anonymous, the program that got me sober. I guess I'm more aligned along the lines of a drug addict. But weed, marijuana, whatever you want to call it, a bunch of names. I used it alcoholically. I used it, and because it's so strong today, and you know, making it legal, if you know, there's a lot of different statistics you can go into, but all making it legal did is, you know, enter, you know, the laws of competition in a free market. And in a year, this stuff was so strong. And all that turned into, as a kid that is using it to kind of escape reality, is just, you can get to where you want to get faster. And the way I interact with substances is I build up a tolerance, I use more and I use more and I use more until I find a stronger one. And then I use more and more and more until I find a stronger one. Then I start mixing them. And it's really dangerous when you talk about the kind of weed that's out there. I'll tell you this might surprise a lot of people. In my experience, weed gets you 10 times more, messed up, high, whatever, than any alcohol I've ever done. Alcohol's got this natural, and these are, I guess, the two most widely used kind of substances in young kids today. Alcohol's got this natural almost, you can't do so much of it because you just get so sick and you're basically poisoned. You get hungover the next day. And weed's not like that. And you got these edibles, these fancy flavored vapes that make it so it's almost enjoyable to engage with the substance and interact with it and consume it. All of this that I'm telling you is to somebody who is using marijuana as a coping mechanism, like Patrick was saying, or basically for me, just to escape reality because I was not comfortable with my own, because my needs weren't met, various different types of things. It just kind of emphasizes the process and can lead down a really, really negative road a lot faster than I think it ever could before. And you can interact with weed in a way that you couldn't before because it is so much stronger. I can't even, because even within the weed that is today, you smoke a little bit of bud and then you try all of the concentrates and you do them different types of ways, and the levels of how actually impaired you get it's insane. So basically, the way I break down, and I kind of wish my parents did learn this, but I wish my parents knew this growing up, this is how I kind of explain my addiction is I started using and getting high regularly to escape my reality, right? And, if my use is going up, and my reality on the outside, the consequences get greater, my reality gets lower. Then I turn to more using, and then the consequences get bigger. And it's just a cycle that just repeats itself. And, you're stretching the lines, all of your hopes and dreams and your morals that you stuck to are just gone. And I thought I was just doing pot in the beginning. And really, I didn't start ramping up drug use and getting into a whole bunch of stuff until I left for college. So by the time I was a senior in high school, all I was doing is, drinking occasionally and smoking copious amounts of weed. And by that time, I was already in a kind of a drug addict mentality. I was interacting with it in a way that normal people just don't do. I think there's three types of people that use weed. There's one that is, I'm not going to use normal because it doesn't really sound right. Just a person that can interact with the substance, like you used to think of it back in the day, just smoke once on the week, every other weekend with a friend group and doesn't think much of it. Because in a lot of ways it is a thing where people, come together and you can form bonds, like social groups that do it together, and it's totally fine. And your life, your grades in school and your consequences are non-existent. You're not doing it while you're driving, that kind of stuff. I mean, I was so delusional that I thought I was a better driver behind the wheel when I was high as a kite on weed than when I was sober. And you can imagine the conversation when I told my parents that. I think that's like the first time they were like, okay, I think he's in kind of deep with this stuff. So there's that person. There's another person who is going through something in life, and they, because of their environment, they start smoking weed or using cannabis, and they kind of get hooked on it. And kind of that firm conversation that Patrick was talking about can kind of snap them out of it. And then there's a third kind of person that I identify with. And then there's something going on upstairs, and or it's something else in your environment, and you just can't stop. And the weed that's out there today, it just greatens that kind of that pull towards the getting high, that unresistible urge, tenfold. And as a parent, I guess it's really hard to tell which one of those kind of kids you're dealing with when you have a kid that's smoking weed. And excuse me, getting a call. Sorry about that. It's getting a call. It showed up on my laptop. Am I still here? Yeah. Okay.
You're still here.
As a parent, I don't know how. I can't tell you a way that you could say to your kid, to figure out any particular thing you could say to figure out, what you're dealing with and how serious you need to take it. But I think this kind of talk and just educating yourself on what this, little, joint from back in the day has blossomed into. I think understanding that information and just like looping this back to what I was talking about, just kind of presenting yourself as a parent, like, hey, like, I know it's not like kind of like in a, aggressive tone, knowing what's going on, but if you could just present the information that you learn in these kind of things in a way that's like, we can talk about this, we're almost on a level playing field. Like we're all just humans existing and on this earth. And it's not a matter of, oh, you're not knowing and you're knowing. Just so the person can be comfortable with. Because if I felt comfortable enough to say to my parents, look, I cannot stop using this. And I don't care if I get good grades. I don't care if I quit the baseball team. If I could have just said that, owned up to it, if I felt comfortable to own up to it, then it's easy to tell, okay, we need to do something about this. But I just, and I'm telling you, it wasn't even because of my ego that I wouldn't say that. It was just because I really thought that I was playing on a different ball field than I guess my parents were. And I wish I nipped this thing in the butt when I was just smoking weed, because the other drugs that are out there that the increased potency in weed, can lead you to, I mean, you go to a matter of life and death in a heartbeat, and you start losing friends you love, and the consequences get even greater out there, and then it kind of loops back to increased use, and it's just a really, really hard thing to be like, once again, just beyond grateful for Patrick Dowling, everything he's done for me in my life, and the knowledge that he taught me. I'll never forget, because I had seen him when I was younger and when I was just kind of getting started, and he could tell. So maybe loop back and we'll do a Q&A with Patrick on how to kind of tell if this is a real problem or not. And he knew right away, and I was not buying it. And we hated each other. I mean, I hated this guy, Patrick Dowling, so much. Fast forward, 4 or 5 years down the road, I've got just over 2 years sober now, living a blessed life, just happy to wake up every day. And I love the guy. I'm blessed for, all the opportunities that he's kind of given me. So I guess it's a good time to stop, and we can do the Q&A portion now. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. That's really beautiful. I think a lot of us love Patrick Dowling. Yeah. Andrew, let's just jump right into a question that came in for you while you're speaking. When you say that you wanted to fit in and love smoking weed, how does that relate to what Patrick said? And what is the need or itch that wasn't being met? Was it, was that, just share what you feel like sharing, but was it only fitting in? And this person says she works with kids and appreciates your input, and I have a follow-up from her as well.
Okay. So yeah, like the very first time I wouldn't have even started smoking weed was just to fit in. I hadn't really drank enough to ever get drunk before. I had no idea what getting kind of high or messed up really felt like. But I think there is, if I look back in my story, I was with, your 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade as a freshman. I got called up to this, to play baseball with all these older kids. I was separated from everybody in my grade. And it was a lot of wanting to fit in. It wasn't even peer pressure because they weren't even saying you need to do this. It was just, this is what I see some kids doing. I must need to do it. So I think I answered the first part, and it was like a 2-part question. If you could just reiterate it for me.
Oops, it's gone. I'm so sorry. Did anybody else? Hang on, here it is. Here it is. How does this relate to what Patrick said about the need or the itch that wasn't being met? Was it only fitting in for you?
Yeah. So the first time I used it was just fitting in. But it was because I started smoking it so much right off the bat that I had lost other friendships. I had cut other people off. I had stopped caring about other aspects of my life. People realized this and they're like, we don't really want to hang out with you anymore. That then occurred kind of the loss of, basic needs that I needed to be met. And I turned right back to just more use. And that whole kind of cycle of whether it's coping with reality or it really turns into, and with the power of the stuff that's available today, just exiting reality to deal with your problems. That's really what it became about. And that's the dangerous interaction. And when you talk about, sustained marijuana use that turns into other drugs, that's the tall telling sign, if I can label one, is why and how you're using it, that you're going to be drawn back to every single time.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Patrick to respond to, there are 2 questions that are really similar. I don't know if you're seeing them, Patrick, but one is, how do you recommend addressing this and getting a 23-year-old who doesn't have to listen to his parents to recognize marijuana use as a problem and want to help himself? And kind of in that same vein is, I have college students who insist they do better on tests when they're high. What can I say to them?
So the first question, the first part of that question, we always go for the relationship first, right? You go for the heart, right? This is how your substance use is affecting me and my ability to have the kind of relationship I want to have with you. That's the first attempt, right? So in the intervention world, we always lead with the heart. We'll bring the 2x4 out if we have to, but you don't lead with that, right? When I say, once you bring the nuclear option out, you can't put it back in the pocket, right? So we always lead with the connection and the relationship, and how that person is experiencing substance use is interfering with their ability to have the kind of relationship that they want, right? Because that's a relationship feedback tool that's sustainable. Meaning, if somebody's going to listen to you just because you have power over them, that's not a sustainable model for how we do feedback, because they said so, right? So I think the relationship and other people who may be seeing a similar concern, that's why in an intervention, it's about getting the right people in the room. And the rule is, who's it hard for them to say no to and easy for them to say yes to? Who do they respect enough that they would listen to that feedback and not just, fluff it off? The second part of the question is, that's called state-based learning. So if you study while you're high, you're actually going to perform better on a test when you're high, because it's state-based learning. So meaning the state of your mind when you're, taking in that information. So when people take a math test in the math classroom that they take math in, they do better than if they're in, say, their English class, right? Because that's state-based learning. So there's the external state, and then there's the internal state. It may also be some other itch that they have. Maybe there's an ADHD issue. Maybe there's an anxiety issue. My concern would be, again, the big joke around Olympic testing for drugs is that marijuana is not a performance enhancing drug, right? Marijuana does not enhance performance, right? Enhances colors, but not performance, right? So for people who are using marijuana as a performance enhancer, I would say, boy, that's a really inefficient tool for that. So I would want to find out what's really going on. What are they really trying to deal with? Because marijuana is not that effective.
Great. Andrew, what role does your family play now with your recovery?
It's a great question. You know, once I developed trust with my parents, not a huge part. Part of you know, my recovery, and especially like Alcoholics Anonymous program, was, you know, a 9-step amends, and one of my amends to them is the kind of pain and harm that I had caused in their life. There's nothing I can do, no kind of, you know, money I could give. Like, there's a lot of other scenarios of how you can make amends. This one turned into a living amends. So everything from treating people with respect, being dependable, just not making them have to worry when they go to bed at night. So many nights they, like, my mom would tell me, even in recovery, you know, I went to bed and I couldn't sleep because I was so worried about you. I was worried you'd die, or, you know, you'd get in a car accident, kill other people, or just terrible things. My biggest job today is for them to trust me, continue behavior that would, you know, that would allow our relationship to continue growing and strengthening, and for them at the end of the day, when they, you know, hit their head on the pillow at night, to not have to worry about me. You know, it's tough, and I didn't really get into this part, but, you know, I moved from the greater Philadelphia area to California. That's where my inpatient program was, and I haven't left, and I don't plan on leaving. Well, let's say for the foreseeable future, I don't see myself leaving. So a lot of the communication with my parents is on the phone now, which I will say is hard. But the times where I come home for, you know, Thanksgiving's coming up, or Christmas, or usually, you know, there I will come over the summer. So meaningful. Just, it's like I kind of have, now that this kind of mess that was my unhealthy relationship with substances and that started with marijuana has been lifted away from me. It's like now I have kind of what was the relationship that was meant to be with my parents, and just working on that, just sitting with them, being with them is a blessing. So I'd say that sums it up pretty well.
A little bit along those lines, can you talk a little bit about the consequences that were happening within your family, you know, when you were younger using? Do you feel that they were significant enough, is a question that came up.
They were significant enough, but to somebody who is really in it, and is losing ever rapidly their concepts and kind of touch with reality and what's really going on, no matter how blaring they are, you're not going to see them. And if you do see them, you're going to run away from them, if that makes sense. I destroyed my relationship with my mom, my dad. I have one sister that I'm still repairing today, as well as a lot of friends, you know, girlfriends, just everybody that came into my life. I, one way or another, had hurt because of, you know, my disease and my interaction with substances. So yes, absolutely, there's blaring consequences. Getting into a bunch of car accidents, you know, being this close so many times, getting caught with police with, you know, various types of drugs. You know, scandals on campus. There's plenty of consequences. I didn't necessarily see them, and if I did see them, I saw them in a way that I either minimized them or I ran away from them with more substance use.
Thanks. And Patrick, I don't know if you're seeing kind of the follow-up to that. Are there enough consequences, you know, presented by parents, or are we parents essentially soft marks or wimps? That's the question.
The answer is yes. Like, I think that, listen, each generation is supposed to get better and healthier, and we're supposed to set the next generation up for success. And I think one of the things that I see us, and I have a teenager, and I'm going to pay Andrew to tell my 14-year-old how cool I am afterwards, because he doesn't believe it. We want them to be successful, right? What we can't do is want it more than they do. So the simple answer I would offer you is, are there enough consequences? And this may sound a little heady, but I always think about, you know, Newton's laws of physics, right? An object tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an equal or opposite force, opposite or greater force, right? Equal or greater force. So if, like for Andrew's example, like if that substance use is a freight train, we are not going to stop it with little signs that says, hey, could you stop if you don't mind? right? So depending on how much power that substance use has, we have to meet that with sufficient power to stop that and say, hey, this is a problem, stop. You got to hit the brick wall and get jammed up. So the simple answer to that question is, are the consequences sufficient to shape behavior? Do they extinguish or shape the behavior? If they are, great. If not, you're not using a powerful enough tool. And our job as mental health practitioners is to make sure you're using the right tools, not just brute force, right? But there's the right tools that we have to use to help facilitate change. And I will just tell you, that often entails being extraordinarily unpopular with your kid and their substance use. And Andrew's example is exactly that. Is it took incredible fortitude for his family and for other families who do this to draw a hard line in the sand. Like, that is scary as hell, because maybe they're going to bounce off of it, right? And maybe eventually they'll lean into it, which has been true in his case. But that's a really, really scary thing for parents to do. I don't see any other option that maintains integrity. If you're dealing with a thing that wants to take everything from you, at some point you have to say enough is enough.
Thanks. Andrew, two questions that are very similar. What made you stop? And also, what stands out in your mind as the most powerful elements of your recovery? How would you describe where you are in your recovery now? And how would you describe the short milestones within the next year that you see ahead of you? And actually, there's a third part.
Okay. Let's start with why did I stop?
Okay.
Great question. I guess there's two answers that would be relevant. The first, why did I go to rehab? Which was far from why did I stop? Why did I kind of really come to this idea, come back to reality? I had an intervention that was surrounded by, I had family members, specialists, I had the father of one of my friends who had died as a result of our use. And it just kind of hit me in almost I thought I would be very mad at the whole intervention thing, but it hit me in almost kind of a warming way, because these are all people that I knew that they knew that I was messed up and I needed help. For them to actually be there in that moment and just offer their support, and kind of hard at first, very awkward, but this kind of understanding that we all know what needs to happen, know that you need help. That was huge. That kind of started my journey into recovery. I didn't last very long at a rehab in Pennsylvania. And then I went to California. That was because of me, not because of the rehab. When I went to California, I was at a very small facility that did a tremendous job at putting a mirror in front of my face and really showing me, what the reality of my life was, how I had hurt the people that I loved, how I had lost touch with the things that I loved. And that, combined with the sheer amount of time away from the substance, for me to really realize how much work I needed to do, coming back to this idea that Patrick brought up, that you are drawn to substances because you need to do some personal growth and work on yourself in healthy ways. I was sitting 6 months sober, zero recovery, and I was miserable. I was crawling out of my skin. I wanted to get high so bad. I wanted just to feel something. I wanted to do something with a girl, or, go gamble on something, or I just needed something. It was that moment I realized, like, holy cow, I'm not okay with myself. And I need to take this thing seriously and really look into, so I can then grow, take this thing with an attitude that, I need help. And with what just started with just weed is a serious problem. So that was the first question. Second one has to do with my recovery. That moment that I just described to you was huge. There was this night that I got kicked out of the rehab that I was staying at, and they had sent me to this behavioral detox because I was such a mess, guys. I'll tell you, I was such a mess trying to get this thing. I was 19. I had no idea what I was doing. And I just kind of fought for a long time. But I got kicked out. I was homeless and I slept on the beach. And although it was like 70 degrees in the day, it was so cold at night with like the wind. And it just kind of hit me. That was a milestone in sobriety. I didn't even get, I hadn't gotten high or drank from the time that I had arrived in California to that, so 6, 8, whatever months it was down the road. That was kind of the time where I was like, I really need to take this seriously. That was kind of the culmination of what I was talking about before. Ever since I kind of turned the corner, not only finishing step work in AA, but picking up sponsees, that's like my purpose today. This is a little bit different than what I kind of envisioned my purpose, but it's still the same idea, is helping others with my experience, being open and honest about what I kind of went through, an effort that it can help other people. Usually, and what I've been accustomed to, I'm in this beautiful little rehab niche of Southern California where there's a steady, swing of young, whether it's 15 to 20-year-old kids that I can relate to really well that need help. That, whether they call me every day, we're working steps, we're doing stuff. I bring them to a meeting, we just hang out, we watch sports. Just building a massive kind of fellowship of people, like friends that, we talked about at the beginning, that a friend group that I can feel comfortable with and I know is going to have my back no matter what. So that was a huge milestone, is starting to take other people through the steps and help other people and feel comfortable to do things like this. I go, the most common panel type deal I'll do is I'll go to other rehab facilities and I'll, talk to people that are, still kicking opiates or really, really, really struggling and help them. Let's see, in the next year, I want to be, I don't know if I want to be a full-time student yet, but I'm transferring out of community college back into a university. So I'm actually finishing the University of California application right now. And it was a long road back to get back to school. And I'm not the kind of person that can just take 5 courses. I've learned that through struggling. I'm not the kind of person that can just take 5 courses. I need to work a little, do a little school, kind of have a lot of balance in my schedule. But get back to school full time would be one of the goals that I would have. And then, if I'm being honest, continuing to strengthen my relationship with my sister. My sister's 2 years younger than me. She was the one that was, lived across the room from me growing up and fought whatever she was dealing with, me and addiction, and went to head with, Mom, Andrew's room smells like weed, whatever it was back then. And it was really, really hard between us for a long time. It took a lot of the anger that I had because of what I was going through on her, and beginning to, develop my relationship and get back to, really, she was my best friend, when I was young, growing up, brother and sister, they might fight a lot, but, are very, very close when you're anywhere from, 3 to 10 years old. And so I'd say those are kind of my 2 biggest goals, as well as just do everything I'm doing right now, helping other people. So yeah.
I really love that you said that about your sister, and this I feel the siblings really kind of get left out of a lot of these conversations. So thank you for bringing that up. It's truly a rough position to be in for a lot of folks. Can I ask you, Andrew? I'm sorry, Patrick. Here's one that I want to give you. My question is kind of the opposite of marijuana use leading to other drugs. 26-year-old daughter lives in Colorado, insists that weed is sometimes helping her to stay sober from other harder drugs that she was addicted to. Her perspective is that it's the lesser of 2 evils. This sounds so illogical to me. Am I wrong?
That's a really tough question. Boy, I got to tell you, I'm a little reluctant to wade into that one, because I think not knowing that person's particular situation, maybe they're doing the very best they can. I believe that there are more effective strategies than weed. I mean, weed's pretty low admission price. Weed doesn't require much of you. doesn't ask many questions. I had treated a gentleman a long time ago, and due to his legal concerns, he had the option to go to rehab because he was relapsing, or go to jail, and he chose jail. We talked him out of it, but he, look, when you go to jail, man, nobody asks you questions. They leave you alone. When you go to rehab, they're going to ask you questions. They're going to ask you what's going on inside there, right? So I think, my concern is when we just turn that relief valve with the weed, we're not answering the harder questions, which deserve real answers. So that's my larger concern. I think sometimes we just also have to meet people where they are. And, to Andrew's point, like, how did I know that he was addicted? Because he was in love. Like when people have that look in their eye, like they're in love with that drug, man. Like, how when somebody's in love with like the bad boy or the bad girl and they're in love, like, good luck, man. You talk to them all you want. They're in love, right? It's an emotional decision. So I think if weed is scratching an itch and it is a perceived solution and you attack that perceived solution, they're going to become defensive. So I think joining with them and helping just understand, what's happening for them and how can we support them in being as healthy as they can be. That's a way to get probably movement, especially when you don't have home court advantage. They don't live with you. You don't have any kind of juice over them or power. I think it's about trying to understand how they're doing and what they need, and is this working? The good news is weed is not really an effective long-term coping skill. So that solution is going to peter out, right? You're going to hit some jam ups. You're going to hit some bumps in the road that weed doesn't solve. When you're on employer number 4 and the last 3 bosses have all been a-holes, maybe it wasn't the boss. And that's what we tend to see when people are not functioning well, or they're hitting jam ups and they're using something to self-medicate. They're not really answering for X or answering the question. So those opportunities are going to continue to present. And if you're perceived as an ally and a support, as Andrew said, maybe you can be open for business on a conversation around how can we be most helpful to you, which also begs the question, how can you be most helpful to yourself? So in some ways, it's a waiting game. I'm sure that you've made your position clear. I don't know that you need to drive the point home for the 100th time, but maybe when there's an opening or something isn't working, they might be open to a more effective solution.
Great. I have another tough one for you, Patrick.
Mhm.
I see elementary school kids who want their parents to quit using substances, but they find it hard to say, I care about you and want you to quit. I tell them no one can stop using unless they really want to. And then the kids can support and encourage them. Is this valid? Is there anything else I can tell kids? It's heartbreaking.
That's a tough one. I mean, especially, yeah, gosh. Well, that's a role reversal, right? Is who's the parent in that relationship. That's a really tough one. And those kids are kind of set up for failure in that they're speaking a truth or their truth. And is their family system open to hear that? So I think just creating safe space for them where they can be validated and heard is really important. And sometimes we're powerless to change their family system, especially if you're maybe as an educator role. I mean, you kind of have to be careful about what you're saying and to whom, but that's a tough spot. I think the feedback sounds appropriate to me, and just empowering the kids that what they have to say, advocating for health, advocating for wellness is appropriate. And maybe their environment's doing a great job supporting them. Maybe it's not. Yeah, it's not fair. Fair left the building a long time ago.
Right. Andrew, if you're comfortable sharing, we have 2 questions asking if AA was instrumental to your recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm comfortable. Yes, the short answer, 100%. Alcoholics Anonymous for me was a way to make friends and I guess kind of develop that friend group of the needs that you need to take care of. At the beginning, especially. In the past year, I have found tremendous resources, similar to Patrick, a lot of time, just kind of sees the world in a little bit different perspective. And it's just it's a knowledgeable resource. There's no other way to describe it. At the beginning, I was so turned away from it, turned off from it. It gets made fun of in movies, like some meetings you walk in, I'm 19 years old, I only see, 67-year-old grandpas in there. But no, Alcoholics Anonymous has been a true blessing. I can tell a really brief story that I was talking to my friend the other day. It's like, what's the coolest AA meeting you've ever been to? And I know for sure which one was mine. It's actually one of the very few meetings I've ever been to with my dad. Most of the meetings in California are hard closed. If you're not alcoholic, we don't want you there, which is tough. But this particular meeting, I went with my dad. We were in vacation in New Orleans on a family trip. And I've been in New Orleans sober. I've been in New Orleans not sober. I enjoyed the one sober a lot more. Anyway, I was searching up a meeting just because not because I needed it, because I wanted to see, what the AA community was like down there. We take an Uber, 5 minutes, like outside the French Quarter into kind of like a, rundown area, and I walk in, there's like 6 people, and some people are just easy to tell they're on drugs, and other people are really, just looking for somebody to be friends with. In AA, you get this just huge scope of people. And I kind of, I guess where I'll wrap this up, why I love Alcoholics Anonymous the most is in my youth, I was so judgmental. I held on to these premature beliefs that I had of the world, other people, alienating others, trying to make myself feel just better in every way, just because, I'm me. If I say, oh, this person that's like me is the best and everybody else is inferior, then I'll feel better, which is the opposite of what I've done in recovery. And I'm friends with, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, so many people that I would have never even said a word to, in my previous life or whatever. Then I'm just left with this full, like people that call me, everyday people that I call that, like I said, I wouldn't have ever talked to. I'm so grateful that I get to. So I hope that kind of gives some insight into what my experience with it is, because it's a lot different than what you see on TV and that kind of stuff.
I love that. That's great. I was at an open AA meeting one time, and somebody said that he never thought his spiritual advisors would be, these are his language, Joey the Junkie and Benny the Pusher. But that's kind of the way this takes us sometimes, right? I want to get this question, and it was an advanced question. I thought it was a very important one for Patrick. What medications could be used instead of marijuana to control anxiety and depression?
So the good news is I'm not going to prescribe anything. But I think, and I'm not ducking the question. I want to answer it meaningfully. Here's the most meaningful thing I think that people can do. Hire really smart people and take their advice, and stay at the table with those really smart people and continue to craft practice, right? So I have a gentleman recently, young guy, dealing with COVID issues, dealing with anxiety. He's not a substance user. I made a referral for him. He was just this case, he was prescribed Paxil, very helpful to him almost immediately. I'm not endorsing that medication or any other. What I'm saying to you is hire really smart people and stay at the table with them, because a lot of times medication is not a one and done. It's a continuing process to get it right. There's genomic testing, there's continued feedback. And one of the things I really advocate for people is when they go see a practitioner, be informed, ask really great questions, ask the right questions, and advocate for yourself, because that person works for you, and their job is to make sure that you get your needs met and the right medication and the right medication management. So I don't think it's necessarily about the medication. I think it's about finding high quality providers and sticking with them, even though you hit some bumps in the road, and sticking in there and doing the work, if that makes sense. Right. There was a time when Andrew and I get along great. There was a time when he had some very colorful language for me, understandably, taking his drug of choice away. Right. So can we stick through the bumps, right, to get to the good part? And I think for anybody who's going to seek medication, is make sure that that's coupled with appropriate therapy as well. Behavioral and cognitive interventions in that medication alone is about 30 to 40% of the deal. We have to have the other part of the deal at the table as well.
Perfect, thank you. And I know we have so many other questions that are just wonderful. But I really try to respect everyone's time, particularly our presenters who made a commitment to be here between 7 and 8:30, darn it. So, or in California time, I guess it's whatever time it is out there, what, 5:30. So I'm going to close, but I did want to ask Andrew to just answer, this is a perfect closing question. What's your natural high today?
My natural high is this kind of thing, just helping others, really seeing kids like me that are just broken, and you can tell they've been through the ringer, and through the tools that I've learned, spiritual principles, basic things, and a lot of hard work, you turn your life around, and that light bulb kind of comes on. I'd say that sums it up. There's one other thing I want to add real quick before you close it. This just kind of came to me as I was thinking more of it. I didn't have the greatest answer for if you're a parent, and me being a kid that went through that, and substance abuse and marijuana abuse. What can you say or do to help and kind of figure out what's going on and be a part of the conversation, like this place called? If I had like my dad, that we were very close, and I love him to death, but when my relationship with passions I had started slipping, if there could have been more of a gentle reminder of like, hey, what's going on with this, what happened to baseball, and less of like, oh, you're giving up on this, you're doing this, if there could have been a gentle reminder to get back on track, I think that could have been super helpful. And if it goes the other way after gentle reminder, maybe that's a better indicator of like, we need some help type deal. But yeah, my natural high today is just seeing people succeed that have had similar experience to me, that have struggled with this kind of stuff. So yeah, thank you again for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. I got to believe that scene behind you has something to do with your natural high today too. You're going to be
yeah, it's true.
And so I don't want to leave folks hanging. I know that you have other questions. My email, I'm going to put in the chat right now. And also follow up on our page. We have Patrick's email there. I don't know, Andrew, if you're comfortable sharing your contact info, if anybody wants to reach out. I don't want to put you on the spot. If you're comfortable with that, I'll add it. And if not, that's fine too. But I'm putting mine in the, hang on, I can't think of type sitting. There's my email in the chat box. So if anyone wants to follow up, contact me or Patrick, whose email's on our site, or anything else that we can help with, asking about providers, other questions. I will do my best to get you some answers. But really want to thank Patrick and Andrew so much for your honesty, your insights. Thank you.
Right on. Good to see you, man. Good to see everybody.
It was great. You guys were great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
I'm still in
Good
Pennsylvania.
night.
I still think I got the short end of the deal.
Because you're in Pennsylvania.
All right. Have a good night, you guys.